And she was a sainted woman, but she was also infuriating. She used to drive my mother to drink, not literally. Mother, I wasn't telling them you drink. She does occasionally. It eases her passage through her twilight years. Going to be in such trouble. When I was in a restaurant as a child, you know, I thought it was highly amusing when the waiter or the waitress came along and they'd ask, what would you have to drink? My mother would say, oh, a glass of water. And I'd say, very wise, mother dear, make such a change from gin in the loudest voice I could. So, whenever my grandmother was near, you would try and find, you know, there are always people who are going to drive you nuts, really, really irritate you, whether you're driving or doing whatever, and you want to say something unequivocal, like, that person's just stupid, I hate that person. Grandma wouldn't have it. Grandma would not have it. Grandma would always see things through other people's eyes. Grandma would never take those glib statements and leave them unexamined. She would pick them apart, and to the greatest irritation, you realized she was right. She was right. She wouldn't leave you with even a shred of it. At the end of it, you were forced to realize that what you'd said really wasn't worthy. Really wasn't worthy. You know, in England, growing up, there were two people who epitomized pure evil. They're known as the Moors murderers. You've probably never heard of them. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. And during the late 1950s and the beginning of the 1960s, they systematically kidnapped children, tortured them to death whilst recording it, and laughing and celebrating with each other. And then they buried the children on the moors above Manchester, way out in the wilds, in the marshes and the moorland where nobody would ever find them. And when they were finally caught, society was horrified because Myra Hindley was a woman. And it seemed to most people that she had done something particularly evil. And that iconic image of her in her 1950s attire with a peroxide blonde hair came to symbolize evil for most people. And I remember there was an article on television about Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, and I made a comment about it. I must have been about 12 years old. Something like, oh, well, burning hell. My grandmother wouldn't have it. And I thought at the time that this was just stupid. Surely I'd found somebody who wasn't a human being at all, but just a symbol for all things evil. And my grandmother started by saying, I loved my children because I was loved. And I said, but you could never be other than you are now. And I said, oh, yes, I could, she said. Yes, I could. My mother loved me. My mother made huge sacrifices for me. My father taught me how to behave properly. My father taught me wisdom. There were people in my life who saved me. She was brought up in the East End of London, in grinding poverty. At the age of 11, the family, 12 of them, 12 children, and 2 parents, moved up to the industrial mill towns in the north of England because they'd heard that children and women could get jobs in the mills, and they were unemployed during the Depression. So they moved up there. And at the age of 11, my grandmother started work in the woolen mills of Yorkshire. She worked continuously in the woolen mills in Yorkshire, despite the fact that the noise perforated her eardrum, and up until 2 days before she gave birth to twins, she was stood at the loom with a bucket next to the loom to throw up in. She, if anybody, could have descended into bitterness. But she remembered that even despite that hardship, there were people who had guided her. There had people who had pulled her back from the brink. There had people who had saved her from madness. And she taught me that phrase, there but for the grace of God go I. Amen. There but for the grace of God go I. And we must think on this. It's too easy to start dehumanizing people. It's too easy. I think I preached a couple of weeks back about the story of the Good Samaritan. And I said that really the only adequate parallel for the Samaritan in today's world, and this causes great confusion every time it's preached, is the pedophile. Because the Samaritan in the ancient world were the defilers of the faith. They were God killers. They were despised by the ancient Israel. to imagine that level of hatred to anybody in our society today except the child molester, which is, again, that totem of evil. We don't get any get-outs. Nobody. Not even those who we feel perfectly justified in dehumanizing. No get-outs, because I think I, in my life, as a gay man, have never been, in the past, particularly good at saying no to temptation. God forbid if I had been born with an inclination to find children sexually attractive. God help me! There but for the grace of God, go I. There but for the grace of God, go I. And our society has this to wrestle with. Instead of just wanting to kick people between the legs and string them up when they do something bad, if we really care about children, if we really care about the murdered and the abused, we will start doing something to help prevent it. We will start doing something to reach out a hand to those who have those inclinations and say, this is a safe place. We will help you with this. We will work with you with this. We will do more than just beat you with a stick when you step away from the path. So, that's the way of it. That's my interpretation of one of the meanings of this terrifying passage. This is where I think it leads. I'm going to leave you with another little fact. Another thing which I hope will cause outrage. It had better cause outrage. Because you're all people who can write letters, you're all people who can make phone calls, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, as a new mayor is coming in and there's change round and about, you need to know this. 6 months ago, I received one of those notifications that sex offenders were moving into the neighborhood. You know? Now, I looked at those, and 2 of those sex offenders were trans women, living just a few blocks up to the right. And I thought to myself, what? So I went online and I looked, and they were charged with crimes against nature. And you know what that is? It's an 1805 law, which is used uniquely to penalise indigent sex workers, women, gay men, and transgender women, that if they offer, and I will say this in the broadest possible, O or A levels, then they can be charged with a felony that carries 5 years imprisonment, which is left over from 1805, called crimes against nature, instead of the usual way of tackling prostitution. Now, I'm informed that up to half of the people on the sex offenders register in Orleans Parish are there for crimes which are non-predatory and which are other than child abuse. Now, that needs to change. That needs to change. And it needs to change with some absolute urgency. Because of one thing which is guaranteed to ensure that you will never be able to be reformed and re-enter society in any meaningful way if you are stamped as a sex offender, for goodness sakes, and your photograph is sent all around the neighbourhood. When what you were was a sex worker. Which is something I don't think we need necessarily be frightened of in the same way. So, please think on that. Find out more details about it if you want. Go online, look into it. But please, write something, make telephone calls, and think about it. Because what we have here is so violently broken that the quantity of lives that are being ruined by the penal system that we have at the moment is beyond count. And it needs to be seriously examined, even if you don't agree with me. Examine what you do believe and what you do feel in the light of Matthew 25, 31 to 40.